one effect of psychedelics on the brain is increased neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change, to form new connections, to establish new information. So different parts of the brain make a connection when you learn something. And if you go through that memory again and again, the connection becomes stronger and stronger. With psychedelics, it helps establish these connections and potentially strengthen them.
Hello and welcome to Polyweb. I'm your host, Sara Tortoli, and my guest today is Marvin Däumichen, founder of the Mind Foundation, a European non-profit organization that promotes psychedelic research and therapy. With Marvin, we talk about psychedelic drugs, benefits and risks associated with certain type of treatment for mental health conditions, what are the most common misconceptions, and the current state of research. I've been following psychedelic research for a while now, and therefore I'm incredibly excited to be able to bring you this episode today. But before we jump into the episode, please note that nothing in this conversation constitutes in any way, shape, or form medical advice, and what is discussed here is the current state of research as of April 2023. And with that, enjoy the episode. Marvin, welcome to Polyweb.
Thanks for the invitation, Sarah. Good to be here.
And it's good to have you here as well. This is kind of uncharted territory for both myself and for a listener of this podcast. But I've been reading a lot about the topic that we're going to cover during the episode, which is psychedelics. And I think that this is one of the most important breakthrough that is going to happen, and is happening in the medical field. And I just, having met you, I just thought that recording an episode together and really bring to light what's the status of the research on this topic is very, very important. And maybe people start getting familiar with this topic. So perhaps I think a good place to start is what do I and what do listeners need to know about your earlier years that can inform your journey up until now, and specifically the creation of the Mind Foundation.
Yeah, the Mind Foundation is a European burden-based research and professional training organization focused on the medical and also for human development purposes, implementation of psychedelic experiences, right? This goes beyond drugs. This goes beyond substances. It's about well-being, learning, healing, and medical treatments. I think that's not necessarily clear to anyone hearing about psychedelics, psychedelic drugs, psychedelic art, psychedelic culture, and so on and so forth. So if you're asking me about the reason why I'm in this, I, like many of us, was exposed to this culture, to such environments. I mean, anyone who's, you know, hopefully many who grew up with listening to the Beatles know that there's something about psychedelics in their music, and most of the great rock music wouldn't be without it. And there's this very typical psychedelic art. We all have an idea of what psychedelic art would look like. It's kind of a large subculture that's somehow a drug culture, but then also sort of leaks into mainstream culture again, referencing the music. So I have a academic background in cultural studies as well as sociology. So also from an academic standpoint, this was also always something that kind of connected to me, right? I would write papers in university. I also did my master thesis on identity work and LSD in the 1960s. You cannot study American history without looking at postmodern times, post-World War, the hippies, etc. So this is what led me to this topic, really.
At which point of researching psychedelics and trying to understand what those compounds are, did you realize that there was something more to it, and that you wanted to contribute to the research and ultimately even creating a foundation around psychedelics?
I was barely aware that there's has been real clinical research happening since the 1950s. Unbeknownst to many, even in the United States, well until the 1970s. The last psychedelic trial was concluded in Baltimore in Spring Grove Hospital in 1977. So that's way after the regulation and or ban of psychoactive substances in 71. So sort of paving my own way and learning what literature was there, again, approaching it more from a cultural studies and essayistic perspective, reading Aldous Huxley, etc. I had no idea there was this research that had happened before and slowly was beginning to re-emerge again in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins, for example, in 2006. But during my studies, there was not much going on. And then I found this psychedelic conference here in Berlin, which was called Entheoscience. I went to this conference and I was quite disappointed, frankly, with the quality of it. It had science in the name, but it didn't have much to do with science. It was mostly about people's experiences with drugs and how they think this made them a better person or how they believe others should use these substances. So this was not the place for me. And I met one of the co-founders, Henrik Jung Abel, at this conference, and he actually criticized this field and the previous attempts to do something on the ground about psychedelics, right? These illegalized substances. And we connected a few months later, founded the Mind Foundation.
So, what's the role of the Mind Foundation, and what role is it playing right now in in the research of psychedelic drugs? And for listeners also, can you give us a definition of what psychedelic drugs are?
Yeah, I think that's really not something we should take for granted that everybody knows what we're actually talking about. Again, everybody has some sort of culturally imposed ideas of what psychedelic is or what it would look like as an art or what music that would be or what drugs it would be. But typically, psychedelic drugs are a class of psychoactive substances that connect to the serotonin receptor in the brain. And these include LSD, psilocybin, which is the active compound in magic mushrooms. It would include mescaline, which is found in peyote and San Pedro cacti. And there are a couple of others, but of course, DMT also, which is the active component in a very most touristically successful brew now in South America. It has been used for hundreds of years, called ayahuasca, the brew. So these all would be chemically related, also in subjective experience and effects, similar drugs of the class of classical psychedelic drugs. And then there are atypical psychedelic drugs such as ketamine, or salvia-divinorin. They also have different pharmacological and pharmacokinetic effects on the brain and subjectively also. But one thing that all the larger class of atypical and typical psychedelic drugs share is that they temporarily substantially alter perception of self, visual perception of surroundings, thought processes, and yeah, aesthetic and cognitive patterns. Okay, that is the explanation of psychedelic drugs. What does the Mind Foundation do? Well, what's relevant about psychedelic drugs? Why? Is this just something for fun that hippies take? No. And again, as I mentioned before, in the 1950s already, there was great psychiatric research into substance use disorder, into the different conditions that now, especially we focus on depression treatment, that one single administration as part of a psychotherapeutic treatment or multiple administrations in a therapeutic process, administrations of these drugs can be a significant boost or possibly a breakthrough for individual patient populations to alleviate and reduce their symptoms. So these drugs are really re-entering the medical field now for a good reason. We have good scientific evidence that's continuously growing. In this regard, MIND is part of the largest psilocybin clinical trial. It's a phase 2b study. Yes, I'm saying the largest because this is the largest science-initiated trial of its kind. We're having 144 treatment-resistant depression patients that are being treated. It's almost completed. And we're also training medical doctors, psychotherapists. We are influencing, let's say we're educating the public. We're having an impact on public discourse on psychedelic drugs, and also we're educating professionals.
I really want to follow up on a Mind Foundation and the research that you've run so far. But first, I want to take a step back and go back to the definition of psychedelics because I think it's really important that first we get this very clear. Like, for example, you mentioned in your answer regarding definition of psychedelics that what all those compounds have in common is the fact that temporarily you're able to disconnect from the self, and if you want, also from the concept of time and space, right? And I want to ask you, why is this important for treatment of certain condition, mental conditions, and what those conditions are? And how is this different from treatment, medical treatment with the SSRI? That for listeners who don't know, SSRI are the medication that you normally will get prescribed right now by psychiatrists to treat certain mental conditions such as depression, but also panic attack, for example.
Maybe also importantly, you said you can disconnect, you can change time and space perception. One thing that's important to notice also, it may just happen to people that have these substances or take the substances, or to patients, right? One factor is also loss of control potentially over thought process. People don't use control with their legs and arms, no, but the different subjective experience of the self and the surroundings is not necessarily always in control of the patient, and therefore can also be a frightening, a very challenging experience, right?
Yeah.
Whatever this quality of the experience brings in the long time, or in the long term, the immediate acute effects that can be very disorienting and also scary for the patient.
We will talk about the risk and
Yeah,
adverse experience after,
yeah,
because of course
yeah.
it's important that people are aware that this sounds really really good on paper, but there are risks associated to
Mm,
it as well.
mm. So yeah, why is this relevant in medicine now, and how is it different from SSRIs? It's true that the conventional psychiatric medicines rather treat symptoms, and therefore are usually prescribed over decades, and patients experience relief only temporarily and as long as they take these medications. The paradigm shift that enthusiasts, or let's say optimists, are hoping for now would mean that instead of having this continued medication to treat symptoms, psychedelic therapy as a new instrument in the psychiatric toolkit, right? It will never replace other treatments, but it might be an additional valuable tool that we're establishing. That this tool can have a sort of transformative psychotherapeutic approach, that patients would go in, have conventional, this is our approach at least. And psychedelic therapy is not fully manualized or standardized still. It's still in its early form, you could say. We don't have one unified global approach to psychedelic therapy. But the approach that we have here is you still will have psychiatrists, psychotherapists, with whom the patient goes through conventional psychotherapy training, in which then there is, at some point after enough preparation, a dosing session with one of these compounds. And that is really a process in which it could happen that the patient has a loosening, a disintegration, temporary disintegration of established patterns of thought, ways of seeing the world, ways of perception, ways of being, and therefore might be able to detach. One thing that is very common is that a certain, let's say, brain state, it's called default mode network, a certain connected state of the brain in which we're normally in depressed patients becomes very rigid. And these patients start always thinking of the same, or these people start thinking always in the same patterns, and are very unflexible. They're just stuck with where they are, right? And if this is something connected to negative feelings, negative feelings of the self, of course, people suffer a lot. So having the chance to detach from that temporarily might give them a glimpse of how things can be different. And if patients have this experience, we can also support the likelihood of this occurring then this needs to be integrated afterwards, right? So during the dosing session, it's usually not too much interaction. It's more about an introspective experience where people can look at themselves, can look at their life undisturbed. And then post session, there will be integration sessions, further psychotherapeutic counseling, in which the patients learn how to bring this altered perspective, if you will. It's not an expanded consciousness. I wouldn't call it that. A different altered state and an altered perspective. How they can bring and keep this in their lives independent of the substance. So here we have a significant splitting up from this continuous symptomatic relief through continued medication, as opposed to having a transformative experience and learning how to keep this and integrate this into your life.
This is very powerful and very, very different from what SSRI are doing that, uh, while helpful, maybe in certain instances, most often come with a wide range of side effects. And I wonder, how are the side effects, we were mentioning it at the beginning of the conversation, what
Mm,
are
mm.
the risks associated with consumption of psychedelics and side effects? And maybe, again, comparing the different side effects from the one of standard medicine and SSRI.
Yeah, I cannot give you a full list of the possible side effects of conventional psychiatric medication, but these include weight gain, fatigue, sexual dysfunction. There's several things, and if you imagine you have a patient that's already depressed, and then they're getting this medication, they're sexually defunct because of the medicine. That's not exactly encouraging, right? Might make them more depressed. Of course, you see one difference here that with psychedelic medicine or psychedelic assisted treatments, you would not continuously prescribe this medication. The person would be not under the influence of a medication most of the time, right? An entire treatment regimen with psychedelics such as psilocybin or LSD would last a few months and probably have 1 to 5 dosing sessions in total over the span of multiple months. So most of the time, the person would not be under the influence of any psychoactive substance. Secondly, of course, looking at other side effects that are not part of the acute. So while the person is under the influence, of course, there can be side effects such as tachycardia. So the heart racing heart. Physiologically, psychedelics are safe. And to really overdose someone, you would have to overdose a tremendous amount. There's very low toxicity, and there are no known deaths or physical severe reactions because of psychedelics themselves. Rather, people were maybe disoriented in an uncontrolled environment and hurt themselves as an accident. This is something that could have happened. But apart from that, nausea is possible as an acute side effect. Again, disorientation, heart racing, but not much more than that. Then it is possible in very rare cases, but it has to be addressed because I don't think people talk about it often enough. There's this phenomenon of HPPD, hallucinogen persistent perceptive disorder. So people would come out of a psychedelic experience and for extended time, weeks after, had the feeling that they're still under the influence of the substance and they feel there's something different in their field of vision, in their way of thinking, their way of being. This is not researched very much. It's not we don't have we don't know much about it, but the phenomenon exists, although it's very rare. And
And
then, of course, another thing that could be the result is a negative effect or as a side effect is there's no proper screening. It is possible to reliably screen out risk patients for whom these substances are not appropriate. Right? This is not the panacea for everyone. There are people with specific genetic dispositions. If you have a history of psychiatric disorders in your near family, which you have had as the patient, you have had psychotic episodes before, you have been diagnosed before, you know that you are prone to mental disorder, then this is also something the person should not take because it could trigger latent psychoses that are maybe somewhere waiting to pop that doesn't normally happen.
yeah, for whom instead? For which type of mental issue and mental disorders as psychedelics proven very effective, at least in clinical trials?
Yeah, I mean, it's only growing, but classically, several affective disorders, substance use disorder has been explored since the 1950s with good successes. There are studies going on now. Again, major depression, treatment-resistant depression. Last year, I think it was last year, a study came out in Imperial College London where they compared. That was the first time that they had a direct comparison between psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, and escitalopram, which is one of the most prescribed conventional psychiatric medicines in SSRI. And they found that psilocybin did not perform better or worse, not significantly better or worse than escitalopram. So that's good. At least it's not worse, right? But it's not convincing enough to bring this new medication in. There were secondary measures. Those were not the primary outcomes that they measured, not the depression scales, but things like quality of life, well-being, overall happiness. And in all these, psilocybin treated patients scored significantly higher. So in further studies, this should be investigated. And of course, I think as much as we're looking at a transformative approach with psychedelic treatments that makes people healthier and starts at the root of the disorder, we should also take away from the pathological perspective, what is the problem, but how can we make people healthier? And health as in defined as a complete sense of well-being, purpose in life, feeling creative, feeling fulfilled. Of course, there are a lot of socioeconomic factors coming in with this too that cannot be treated by a mental health professional. But the overall approach should be a salutogenic rather than just treating what is wrong. Again, coming back to the atypical psychedelic substances, this would include MDMA, which is a totally different substance class. It also has quite a different subjective effects profile, but it's still considered as one of the bigger group of psychedelics. Has been designated a breakthrough status by the American FDA in 2018 for the treatment of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And then there are trials happening with anorexia nervosa, so eating disorder. There are trials going to start in cognitive impairment. Johns Hopkins has also been starting to look into depression in Alzheimer's patients. We have at least a good theoretical foundation to believe, due to the neurological effects of psychedelics, there might also be potential to actually prevent neuroinflammation, which is dementia. And yeah, the whole, a wide range of anxiety and other affective disorders too.
How is how is it related to Alzheimer? I didn't understand the connection between dementia, Alzheimer, and psychedelics. Can we go back to that because that's new to me?
Alzheimer's disease is a form of dementia that has been discovered by this person called Alzheimer's. So it's named after a person, but it's also the name of this disease, right? Which is cognitive impairment that usually happens in old people with loss of memory and so on. How is this connected to psychedelics? So one thing that's also quite interesting and unique to psychedelics is that, also compared to SSRIs, right? SSRIs do something with the brain and makes people feel different. Psychedelics also kind of do that, but they trigger a different psychological process. So we have psychological effects on one hand, right? SSRIs don't bring me to see things in a different light. They just don't make me feel so bad. So there's a psychological component connected to the psychedelic experience. And on the other hand side, we have the neurobiological factors, the mechanisms. Things change in the brain. Different areas in the brain become more connected. Some areas that are normally more active become down-regulated, versus other areas that go up-regulated, become more higher regulated and become more active. This also has an effect that is called neuroplasticity. So now we're only talking about the neurobiological mechanisms, right? One effect of psychedelics on the brain is increased neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change, to form new connections, to establish new information, roads, highways, right? The way we memorize things is going over the same thing again and again. So different parts of the brain make a connection when you learn something. And if you go through that memory again and again, the connection becomes stronger and stronger. With psychedelics, it helps establish these connections and potentially strengthen them. And the sort of flexibility, which is this neuroplasticity, is increased after the administration of psychedelics. And also has been shown in mice models and in vitro that LSD has anti-neuroinflammatory properties. So the brain tissue can also get infected or inflamed. And certain psychedelics have a protective, at least there's some basic evidence now that they have a protective function that would prevent this inflammation. Alzheimer's is a neuroinflammation.
Interesting. That's new to me, and
It's complex.
yeah,
For sure.
but I think it's amazing. So thank you for answering that. And one thing, when I started researching psychedelics, that was a few years ago, and I started to talk about it with immediate friends and also family member. I Some of the most common comments that I got is, "Oh, but those are drugs. You will get addicted. They are dangerous." So I imagine that in your line of work, you got, at least in the past, if not still, plenty of people, concerns, let's say. So, what are the most common concerns and misconceptions that surround psychedelics, and how do you normally address those? What's your reply to that?
Yeah, in the public domain, there might be misconceptions such as psychedelics would be addictive. That is not the case. Of course, it is possible, like with anything, to develop a certain psychological addiction that you have a feeling, oh, I want this and I want this again and again. But due to the effects, the subjective effects, how someone experiences psychedelic experience, it's very unlikely that this happens. In fact, in most cases, people will have one experience, couple in a lifetime. They will go into a trial, get treated once or get two doses and come out of this, say, well, this was a such a dense and intense experience. I need years to process this. So it is possible to get psychologically addicted. I cannot say this doesn't exist. It's highly unlikely, but I would be lying if I said there's nobody that abuses it because they're so in love with these effects. I'm sure these people exist. Secondly, there's no real toxicity with the classical psychedelics such as LSD or psilocybin. If you dramatically overdose, I'm sure this can have very detrimental effects on the psyche of a lot of people. So important call to caution. And the third thing would be actual physical addiction, physiological addiction, that people have a so-called craving, that they feel sick without the substance, like they would have on a prolonged habit of opiates, such as heroin, right? You get an actual cigarettes even. You get an actual physical dependence. This does not happen with psychedelics. It's impossible. It is actually, you could say they have more of an anti-addictive property that after taking it once, you will not get the same effects the next day unless you double the dose. And if you double the dose again for the next day, it will not be enough. You would have to quadruple it. So it goes almost exponentially. And after a few days, if somebody really decides to take LSD for 5 consecutive days, the fifth day or the sixth day, it will not be possible to get this effect. It just doesn't work. So this is one of the misconceptions about the risks. And then, of course, do people go crazy? Well, it's not for everyone, and people should not take it in uncontrolled settings without supervision of ideally a medical doctor, right? More and more retreat centers are emerging. Obviously, everybody knows that people take psychedelics privately. This is not necessarily safe, but we don't see a lot of emergencies there. Not as much as you compare to most other drugs, but I don't like this whataboutism. I don't want to compare psychedelics to other drugs and say one is better, the other is less dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense. Let's switch gear and talk about the Mind Foundation, and the research that you're doing at the foundation. First of all, for context, how did you go about and create a foundation? Like, who were your main partners? How did you involve institution? This is just for context.
Yeah, I mean, from the beginning, it was very important to us that we work as part of society and not against it. And we're not a political advocacy group. If and at the core of what we're doing in our philosophy and our values is the scientific approach, which also is openness to mistakes, willingness to change your opinion if evidence is found that proves the opposite of your previous opinion. So if we discover that psychedelics are more dangerous than helpful, we will abandon this in medicine. It does not look like it. It looks to the contrary. That's why we're moving forward with this work, and many universities and other research institutions worldwide. But I think this is at the core of the values that we uphold, right? And this is also the principle of science, evidence-based approach. So this is where we come from. That makes it easy for us to talk to those that are skeptics or those that don't know, and we need to convince them in a way that psychedelics are not just bad or the psychedelic experience is without merit. We are looking at the evidence that exists. We're building new evidence from an unbiased perspective. At least it's always the goal, and see what is the best potential for medicine for human development. Psychedelics seem to hold promise. So we also, in that sense, we also started from the beginning, cooperating at Charité, starting a conference on drug science. That's the name of it in 2017. Since 2019, we have our own biannual conference. Another one takes place this year. And more partnerships have emerged with different institutions. So we're partners with, in the psilocybin study, for example, that we are partners in. It's headed by Gerhard Kunda at the Central Institute of Mental Health in Mannheim. The Charité University Clinic in Berlin is another partner in this study. And naturally, the connections emerge in this way. We have done several smaller research projects, such as psychological surveys. We speak at conferences, as I mentioned, our conference. So there's always a networking part going on and collaboration because different centers across the world, as I mentioned earlier, Johns Hopkins University has their own psychedelic and consciousness research center. Naturally, there are similar interests, and this is how you network in this field, of course, and build projects together.
Yeah. So, specifically in the case of the Mayan Foundation, what is your current line of research studies? And what's the results so far that you've seen? And how are you, for example, cooperating with other research institutes, right? You were just mentioning, for example, John Hopkins, but that's just one of them.
Yeah, I mean, we've had new surveys running that have partly been published, partly are being in the process. One also wrote about a research instrument, a questionnaire that people use now, and an approach to certain behavior framework of beneficial and rather not so beneficial behaviors resulting from psychedelic experience, which would be avoidance-based behavior. Usually doesn't solve the problem, makes sense, right? But having a scientific buildup of this makes it real. So there's an avoidance-based behavior versus acceptance-based behavior. Right? We have demonstrated that acceptance-based behavior promotes positive therapeutic outcomes. This is one small thing that came out of the survey. The bigger studies are running now, so I cannot say that there have been results. Of course, our therapists and our researchers in the episode trial, in the clinical study, have been there with most of the patients, and they can anecdotally tell you, yeah, well, this patient has really gotten better, this patient hasn't. But there has not been a real publication yet. They're still treating the last few patients and will publish the data beginning next year.
Which type of study is that? Which type of patients and conditions, and which type of substances?
Yeah, that's the episode trial. It's the one I mentioned earlier, the world's biggest science-initiated clinical trial in psilocybin,
Hmm.
magic mushrooms substance or compound for treatment-resistant depression. It has 144 patients. It is taking place in two study centers here in Berlin and Mannheim in the southwest of Germany. The partners in the study are Central Institute of Mental Health Mannheim, Charité, and Mind Foundation. And it is also a real breakthrough that it has been financed by the German Federal Ministry of Research and Education with 5.5 million euros. So they're about to conclude this in the next couple of months. At our conference, there will be at least an anecdotal reporting on the study. Also, patients from the study will have a place at the conference and talk about their experiences in the study, and it will be published early next year. And then there's another study going on that we recently received a small grant. And don't think that we have a lot of money. It's the opposite. And the money that we're receiving for these studies is not going to the Mind Foundation, it's going into projects. So we received another smaller grant for a study looking into acceptance and knowledge towards psychedelic assisted therapies. So this will be a large survey across Germany, so for all German speakers. And there will also be interviews with different stakeholders, because implementing psychedelic therapies, of course, the patients and the general public are one stakeholder. And you have those that treat them, the medical doctors, the psychotherapists. And last but not least, we of course want to make this accessible to everyone who can benefit from this, would be those that pay for it, the health insurances.
Yeah, that's a good question. Is it gonna be covered by the health insurance or not? You know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, with my colleagues, we founded the Ovid clinics here in Berlin. I'm sitting in one of their rooms, one of the treatment rooms when psychedelic therapy is already taking place. They are using, again, it's psychotherapy with one of the treatment methods being a ketamine infusion. And they have very good results with a wide range of symptoms and a wide range of patients. And it's already taking place now, but the health insurance does not cover it yet, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Some of the private insurances do, more will soon, hopefully in the future. No, definitely in the future. The question is just when psilocybin will become an approved medicine for psychotherapy and psychiatry. And it will also be covered by the public health insurance in Germany. Sure.
What needs to happen still for psychedelics drugs to be approved for treatment of certain conditions, such you just mentioned, the study that you're doing right now, depression, right?
Yeah, I mean, here in Europe, we're usually more bureaucratic, more rigid. We're also part of this large European Union. So we have many agreements. We have the Schengen agreements. We have the EU agreements. Then we have the United Nations agreements. There are a lot of different contracts that make innovations difficult. German government's plan to legalize cannabis, but there are a lot of those agreements in the way. And then you have others in totally different areas of the world, such as Australia, that just decided, okay, with little preparation, they just not legalize, but they regulated MDMA and psilocybin as a psychiatric medicine that can be prescribed by any psychiatrist starting in July. It's 2 months from now, right? This is a very recent development, and it's quite crazy because especially in Australia, there haven't been much studies. Nobody has been trained in this different treatment method, and suddenly this is thrown on the medical market, and any psychiatrist can prescribe these drugs. So in Europe, it's going to take a little longer. I think also the United States will be a little faster, especially since the FDA already in 2018 declared MDMA and psilocybin breakthrough therapies. So it's going to take a bit longer in Europe. What needs to happen from my perspective? We need to finish the episode trial with promising results. Compass Pathways is a pharmaceutical company that has recently published data from their phase 2b trial. They're starting a phase 3 trial. So phase 2 is already a larger study, but it's a really large sample or patient population you have in phase 3. So the episode trial, ours has to go well. Positive results. Then the start of a phase 3 trial. The problem is this needs so many millions of euros. We're not talking a 2-digit number, but possibly 100 million or more. So how to get this financed without having all the big pharmaceutical companies having a stake in this? This is very tricky. Our goal is to have a federal psilocybin that is really owned, and the procedure to making it technically owned by the German government, and that all the insurances will cover it. The phase 3 trial would be the biggest step that has to be approved. And after that, I think regulators are changing their minds now and learning and are showing openness. Also, the Insight conference is here. There will be a regulators workshop with top level officials from the European Medical Agency, from the TGA, which is the regulatory board for drugs in Australia. Hopefully we'll get someone from the FDA as well, and then on a national level as well here in Europe. Regulators are opening up to the potential of psychedelics in psychiatric medicine.
Interesting. Let's talk about funding the research and the role of pharmaceutical companies. Because one will think, that contrary to popular belief, psychedelic drugs do not cause really dependencies for all the reason that you listed before, which is not the case for SSRI. SSRI are usually medication that you have to take every day, or most days at least, usually at the same time, and they do cause dependencies. At least some do, right? So one will think that pharmaceutical company have little to no interest to the approval of psychedelic drugs. So what's the status there?
Yeah, I mean, this is an ongoing discussion in the psychedelic bubble among those idealists and these rebels against big pharma and so on. I think it's oversimplifying the whole process of bringing a medication to the market. This is incredibly expensive. It's incredibly expensive. And pharma, Compass Pathways, right? They have only been able to run such a large trial. Ours is 144 patients, and it was heavily underfunded. We're lucky that it's getting more public funding now. Compass Pathways didn't get public funding. They have 240 patients. And now they're starting a phase 3 trial. So without the investments of private actors, this would not be possible. So what is the alternative to this, right? If you don't get public funding and you don't want to get into the hands of these evil investors, then the only possibility is there will not be such trial. It's just simply not going to happen. So it's oversimplified. Of course, there's also this issue of ongoing medication versus giving people a substance a few times and then there's no more revenue for those who produce the medicine. Well, there's some truth in this, but still psychedelic therapies are expensive. They cost lots of time for therapists. There are usually two therapists in one session with one patient. That's only the dosing session, right? The dosing session itself needs two therapists that will be with the patient for probably 5 to 6 hours. And of course, it's part of a larger therapeutic regimen. So yes, it's the manufacturers that make less money, but still psychedelic therapy is not cheap. We also need to work on that. If you compare a lifelong medication of SSRIs to a 2 months treatment, then yes, if you look at a longer time span, it would be much cheaper. Yes, but as a compact time frame, it's also expensive.
Mm. You just touched on a topic, and I know this is one of the things that you're doing with the Mind Foundation, which is training of medical experts. Like psychiatrists, psychologists. How do you retrain? Because I think in this case we can talk about retraining, right? Of like medical doctors and psychologists, etc., to be able to work with patients and psychedelic drugs.
I don't think we should call it retrain, and I'll tell you why. So the courses that we offer, the augmented psychotherapy training, in short APT, is only available to licensed psychotherapists. And that's a bit of a difficulty internationally because in Brazil there are other requirements to practice psychotherapy than in Europe. But that's an issue of its own, right? Regulation and licensing, but it's only available to psychotherapists and licensed medical doctors. Complementary medical experts, practitioners of medicine that are not medical doctors or psychotherapists can do a 1 year training, but the main full training as a psychedelic therapist would be 2 years. This is something for people that have already completed the full training, right? The medical training or psychotherapeutic training, and it comes on top of it. And as I mentioned earlier, psychedelics therapy will never replace pharmacotherapy or conventional psychiatric medicine, right? It will not replace it. I don't think so. And my colleagues don't think so. But it will be another tool in the toolkit. So people don't need to relearn, but they need to learn something additionally. This is something they can also do. And we also want to have multi-professional teams. Ideally, in a psychedelic clinic, there would be a music therapist. There would be a psychiatrist. There would be a conventional cognitive behavioral therapist, or all sorts of different groups, systemic therapy. And we're also open in a sense that medical doctors can be there. It doesn't have to be only psychiatrists. So potentially a surgeon could also sign, but this person has a full medical training and is specialized in surgery. Okay, sure. But the person is licensed to practice medicine. Something that we don't want is to train more underground therapists that practice, metaphorically speaking, in their basement in an uncontrolled setting, something that they believe is appropriate, of which there's no license at stake other than the license that we issue. Right? If somebody has just named themselves the great shaman, they can also start creating a framework in which sexual violence would be part of this, right? So this needs to be regulated, especially with patients that are in such a uniquely different state of being. Even things like touching the hand of the patient or so. This can become very tricky. Consent, how much can they give consent during the session? All this changes. So it would be a risk to grant a certificate or to license someone that is not properly qualified to medically treat people. That's our approach.
For people that are interested in psychedelic drugs and would like to start approaching them, right? What would be your suggestion?
Yeah, depending on where you are, there might be studies happening in your area. We have my friends and colleagues at the Maastricht University there, or to start with the list and not go in detail. So in Maastricht, in Basel, in Switzerland, at Zurich University, at Imperial College London, at King's College London. There are different locations in Europe, plus United States, that are also looking for people to partake in psychedelic psychedelic studies that are healthy, not only looking at patients. So if somebody's interested in having such an experience in a controlled and definitely safe setting, and who will also be sure that there's no risk for themselves, that they can be screened properly, that they can be checked if there will be a risk for that person, this would be the way to go. And there are of course people that get drugs from the black market. There's also this issue with research chemicals that are not yet fully regulated. All this exists, but I would not advise people to jump into this because these are very powerful compounds and they trigger very powerful experiences. They have at least the potential to, and this can be quite disruptive.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe for people that are considering, doing it in the comfort of their own home without medical supervision, maybe you can show us the other side. Like, what what is it like instead doing it with medical supervision? Why is this so important to have integration sessions afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, not just that. As I mentioned, the studies with healthy subjects, I don't think there will be so much preparation or so much follow up, which I'm sure a lot of people could benefit from. We, as the Mind Foundation, will also offer integration workshops to people that have had psychedelic experiences or are interested in having such experiences to learn tools, to learn theory and practice, how to make more and how to bring value-based change into your life, positive lasting change instead of just having a trip one time and then whatever, making it just a memory. So I don't know what to advise for people who would like to try it privately. That's not something that I would advise. I would advise caution. And I think more importantly, something that I can recommend is there are also fantastic ways of altering your consciousness without substances. And while this call with you has been focused mostly on psychoactive substances, psychedelic drugs, it's very important to know that the Mind Foundation is not about substances. We're about medical treatment, psychotherapy, human development, and psychedelic experience is one such tool that we have. Then again, you have to understand psychedelic experience is not necessarily only brought by substances, but also by meditation. Breath work is very powerful. Sports, dancing. There are different ways, sensory deprivation things. They're exciting ways that can induce an altered state of consciousness that can be very psychedelic without taking drugs.
Absolutely. Let's imagine that psychedelics get approved tomorrow. How could this change, like how we live as a society, possibly, as individuals? And maybe what are the business opportunities also associated with an approval of those compounds?
So I'm going to stick exactly with what you suggested. Psychedelics get approved tomorrow,
Yeah,
and you can practice medicine with them, and that means you can also open retreat centers for healthy people that want to have such experiences. Like it's already partly happening in the Netherlands. It's not legal, but it's tolerated in a gray zone. Let's say this becomes enabled in Germany tomorrow. I don't think we're ready for it. I don't think there will be a lot of malfeasance. There will be businesses popping up that have very guruistic, religious, dogmatic approaches to psychedelic that are overly enthusiastic, that promise you a different life and to make you the best possible person you could be. And very few of them, if any, will hold their promises. There will be people that go crazy. There will be people that have very intense experiences in large groups where, if there's business interest and there's not enough regulation, this could mean that people just throw 200 people in a large room, give them all LSD. Some people start screaming while others want total silence. Both of them had a bad experience. And then these people go home and they may be traumatized, or they need someone to talk to who understands what they just went through. And that person is not their buddy who just had the same experience, but somebody who's really qualified and understands and has a grasp of psychological processes and therapeutic work. So I don't think we're ready for this. And I don't think if psychedelics were legalized tomorrow, society would be better, become better. What we need is a very reasonable, mature approach that also takes responsibility for those that may not have the knowledge to or the control over themselves to practice such altered states in a safe way without being paternalistic, to create a consensus understanding of what healthy states of mind would be. To develop a framework, we call this Bewusstseinskultur, culture of consciousness. Develop a societal framework in which we know what is good for us and what isn't. I don't think giving Donald Trump psychedelics would make him a better person. And you cannot give people psychedelics and expect that suddenly they will stop flying to India and South Africa. What do I know? Jetting around the world. I don't think they will stop this. But if we have a different, if we have a systematic approach, an open discourse in society that is participatory, not just hearing about some people, some climate activists gluing themselves to the street, but having an open discourse and people getting a feeling of connectedness through psychedelic experience, for example. And being part of this discourse, understanding how this all relates, this could really change, but we need a systematic approach. Then coming back to the medical paradigm that I mostly talked about. Well, I don't think we have enough therapists and psychiatrists ready. They are not ready. And if psychedelics were legalized tomorrow, I mean, I mentioned this for Australia. This is going to happen in July. I'm talking to colleagues on a weekly basis. They don't know how will all those therapists or the psychiatrists How will they treat patients? They have no expertise. They don't have a psychedelic therapist training, right? It's a different therapeutic approach, and this is something that needs to be learned. So if it was legalized as medicine tomorrow, nobody would know how to use it.
Yeah. Ho- How, when you say we need to develop a systematic approach, how do you imagine that would be? What would be this approach?
A rigorous training such as we offer, and I'm not saying this to advertise for a training, but if you use, I mean, if you want to transport people in an airplane, you need a license as a pilot, and you cannot just fly a few times with your buddy as a passenger or as a co-pilot. No, this is a serious training because it's a powerful instrument. So there needs to be a rigorous training from professionals to professionals based on evidence, not on beliefs. So somebody who has used lots of psychedelics, who has some kind of shamanism training from South America, who hung out with the Shipibos and drank ayahuasca for 5 years. You cannot just bring that to Europe and think this is applicable here. That's a totally different cultural context. And these are cultures that are not like ours. Their approach, their understanding of medicine is not our understanding of medicine. So we need to develop something here that is based on universal mechanisms of therapeutic change that are based in science, that we can then apply into training into psychedelic therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. Marvin, this has been a wonderful conversation. Is there anything that listeners or the audience could do to support the Man Foundation that you can think of?
There are loads to do. I mean, we're tremendously grateful for any donation. As I mentioned, we don't have a lot of money. If you go to our website, it all looks great, but we're a small organization, and what we're doing is we're public benefit, so we're charitable under German law. Nobody's here to make money, but to make society and the world a better place. So any donation would be much appreciated. We have a membership program for people who want to get involved, become part of the community. We have lots of cool stuff like interdisciplinary online course on psychoactive substances called Molecules. We offer trainings, we offer workshops, anything people want. I think we have it related to psychedelics, except for drugs, because we don't do it. And of course,
Well,
there's the Insight Conference, which is probably the highlight of this year.
yeah. We will leave all the resources mentioned, plus maybe some educational material in the show notes and in the description of the YouTube video. But Marvin, this has been really an amazing conversation. I care deeply about this topic, and I'm glad that we were able to sit together and record an episode on psychedelics. And maybe, after the studies have been published in January, we will do a round two at one point. Thank you very much
Hmm?
for being here.
Sure, my pleasure. It was fun. I hope I brought the message across. It's a very complex area, and it's hard to condense the points because always there's so much to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for listeners who have questions, we'll leave, the Mind Foundation contact. And as well, we will read every comments like on YouTube. So thank you very much, Marvin. And for listeners, we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye bye.
That's all from today's episode. Thank you so much for watching or listening. If you find this episode valuable, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or to the Polyweb podcast on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. It will be fantastic if you could leave us a rating, a review, or a comment, as this really helps other listeners find the show. All the resources mentioned in this episode will be linked in the description and in the show notes. See you on the next episode. And if you cannot wait until next week, you can watch this episode right here that relates to some of the things that we talk about in this episode. Bye.